They wrote history with ink, but Queen Nzinga wrote hers with blood. The Europeans called themselves civilizers, yet they arrived with chains, whips, and guns. They preached religion, but sold black children into slavery. They crowned themselves righteous, while turning Africa into a hunting ground. But in the middle of this storm, one woman refused to kneel. She turned diplomacy into a weapon. She turned her body into a battlefield, and she showed the world that Africa would not die quietly. Her name was Queen Nzinga, the woman Europe could never break. Welcome to Real African History, the place where Africa's forgotten voices rise again, where buried stories of resistance and resilience are uncovered, and where the world is reminded that Africa was never silent. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and join us, because today, you're about to witness one of the fiercest stories ever told. Now, let's journey back to the year 1583, to the lush green lands of Central Africa, where a child was born who would make kings tremble and empires shake. Her name was Nzinga. The birth of a lioness. In the late 16th century, in the year 1583, within the royal palace, a child was born. Her name was Nzinga Mbande. Nzinga was not just any child. From the very moment she entered the world, destiny whispered her name. Her birth was strange. Her umbilical cord wrapped tightly around her neck, strangling her before she could even breathe. Many thought she would not survive, but she did. She broke free. The elders of Ndongo took it as a sign, a prophecy. This child will one day choke her enemies. Her father, King Nzinga Samba, ruled Ndongo with strength and pride. But around his kingdom, the world was changing fast. Far to the west, across the Atlantic, Portuguese ships had begun to creep along the African coast. At first, they came smiling, speaking of trade, ivory, salt, and cloth. But soon, their true hunger showed. They wanted people. They wanted slaves. The Portuguese played a cruel game. They armed rival tribes with guns, spread deceit like poison, and fueled wars that tore families apart. Whole villages were burned. Mothers chained to daughters, fathers ripped from sons, all marched to the coast where ships with open jaws waited to devour them. The transatlantic slave trade had begun its dark march across Africa, and yet, inside Ndongo's palace, Nzinga was being shaped for a different destiny. Unlike many girls of her time, she was not raised to be silent or delicate. She was raised as a warrior. From childhood, Nzinga was taught to ride horses, to shoot arrows, to wield spears with deadly precision. Nzinga trained with men, sparred with soldiers, and never backed down. But King Nzinga knew the world was more than battlefields. He made sure Nzinga learned the art of politics, the secrets of diplomacy, and even the language of the Portuguese themselves. Imagine it, a young African princess, speaking the tongue of her enemies, listening to their promises, and seeing through their lies. Nzinga was more than a fighter. She was a thinker, a strategist, a child being molded not just for survival, but for leadership. Her people watched her grow and whispered, "This girl carries the spirit of kings." And her father agreed. He often said, "Nzinga is no ordinary daughter. She carries within her the fire of a ruler." But beyond the palace walls, the shadow of the Portuguese grew darker and darker. Ndongo's enemies multiplied. Slavers prowled the borders. And soon, Nzinga would be forced to step out of the innocence of childhood and into the fire of history itself. The rise of a warrior princess. They say a true leader is not born on the throne, but forged in the fire of trials. For Nzinga Mbande, that fire burned hotter with each passing year. As a young girl, Nzinga watched the Portuguese creep deeper into Central Africa. They arrived with strange weapons, shiny beads, and silver tongues, promising friendship, but leaving only chains and sorrow. Many in Ndongo feared them, but Nzinga did not. Nzinga studied them with sharp eyes. She noticed how their priests blessed before battle, how their merchants haggled, how their soldiers fired their muskets. Nzinga was a student of her enemies, always learning, always calculating. Her father, King Nzinga, saw her brilliance. While other princesses were taught to sing, Nzinga was taught to fight. She ran with warriors until her legs burned. She drew her bow until her fingers bled. Her spear flew straighter than the wind, and her aim was so precise that hunters said even the birds feared to fly above her head. But Nzinga was not just muscle and might, she was mind. She sat silently in the king's court, listening as elders debated, as envoys bargained, as generals plotted their moves. Where others saw confusion, Nzinga saw patterns. Where others saw danger, Nzinga saw opportunity. Soon, Nzinga's father began to consult her on matters of state. Imagine that, a teenage princess, not yet crowned, shaping the decisions of a king. Her words carried weight. Her wisdom gave courage. Nzinga was no longer just a daughter of the royal house. She was a voice of Ndongo itself. Legends grew around Nzinga. Warriors spoke of her endurance, how she could run for hours without tiring. Diplomats whispered about her intelligence, how she could speak Portuguese with startling fluency. To Nzinga's people, she was becoming more than a princess. She was a lioness rising, a symbol of hope in a kingdom shadowed by fear. And yet, the storm was only beginning. The Portuguese tightened their grip, demanding land, slaves, and tribute. Ndongo's enemies grew bolder, emboldened by European guns. The air was thick with tension, the drums of war echoing closer each day. Nzinga knew her destiny was no longer in the palace halls. It was out there, on the battlefield, in the courtrooms of kings, in the dangerous dance with foreign powers. The world was testing her, and with every test, the warrior princess grew sharper, stronger, and more fearless. But the true test was yet to come. Soon, the old king would fall. Rivalries would ignite, and in the heart of chaos, Nzinga would rise to claim the throne and face the greatest empire her people had ever known. The throne and the empire's challenge. The death of a king is never just the end of a life. It is the beginning of struggle. For the kingdom of Ndongo, the death of King Nzinga in the early 1600s left behind a storm of uncertainty. His sons, rivals, and Portuguese forces all circled like vultures, eager to claim the throne. And in the midst of it all stood Nzinga. At first, Nzinga's brother, Nzinga Mbande, took the throne. But he inherited a kingdom already under siege. Portuguese colonizers had entrenched themselves in Luanda, building fortresses and controlling trade routes. They armed rival tribes, captured thousands of Africans, and shipped them across the Atlantic as slaves. Ndongo was squeezed from all sides, its villages raided, its fields burned, its people enslaved. King Nzinga Mbande, desperate to hold power, grew paranoid and ruthless. He executed nobles he suspected of betrayal and even ordered the death of Nzinga's only son. Yet through this darkness, Nzinga remained composed, biding her time. She served as her brother's advisor, carefully studying both the Portuguese and their African allies. In 1622, when the kingdom faced total collapse, King Nzinga Mbande turned to Nzinga for help. Nzinga was sent as Ndongo's envoy to negotiate directly with the Portuguese governor in Luanda. It was here that Nzinga displayed the brilliance that would mark her reign. The Portuguese, arrogant and dismissive, refused to offer her a chair at the negotiating table. They expected her to kneel on the ground like a subject. But Nzinga was no ordinary envoy. Calmly, she ordered one of her servants to kneel on all fours, creating a human seat. Nzinga sat with dignity, eye to eye with the governor, as an equal. That single act was not just defiance, it was a declaration. Ndongo would not bow to Portugal. The negotiations ended with a temporary peace treaty. For a moment, Ndongo breathed easier. But soon after, Nzinga's brother King Mbande died. Some say poisoned, others whisper suicide. Regardless of the truth, the throne was left empty, and the kingdom teetered on the edge of ruin. The chiefs and nobles turned to Nzinga. She was not the first choice for some. After all, she was a woman in a world where men dominated leadership. But Nzinga had proven herself sharper than generals, bolder than diplomats, and wiser than kings. Nzinga was crowned Queen of Ndongo, and later, ruler of Matamba as well. Yet her coronation was not just a victory. It was the beginning of the empire's greatest challenge. Standing between Nzinga and peace was the vast power of Portugal, wealthy, armed with European guns, backed by the Atlantic slave trade, and determined to expand. To survive, Nzinga knew she could not fight with swords alone. She needed strategy, alliances, and above all, unbreakable will to protect her people. The throne had given her power, but it had also given her a war that would define the rest of her life. The battle for freedom. The sun rose over the African horizon, casting golden light across the lands of the Ndongo kingdom. But for Queen Nzinga, each sunrise was not a promise of peace, it was a reminder of the growing storm. Queen Nzinga understood something few leaders grasped at the time. Resistance was not only fought with spears and arrows, but with strategy, alliances, and psychology. And Queen Nzinga was a master of all three. First, she built her army. But unlike the Portuguese, who had ships filled with gunpowder and cannons, Queen Nzinga's soldiers were forged from resilience. Men and women alike, hunters, farmers, refugees, and escaped slaves, all found purpose in her ranks. She trained them to move with precision, to fight in ambushes, to strike and vanish into the forest before the Portuguese could respond. And then came her boldest move. Queen Nzinga formed an alliance with the Mbamde, a feared warrior group known for their ruthless discipline and battle ferocity. Many thought it was madness to partner with such fearsome raiders. But Queen Nzinga knew that in war, survival required strength beyond one's own borders. With the Mbamde by her side, her forces grew into a powerful army that could stand against Portuguese muskets. The battles that followed were nothing short of legendary. Imagine this: Portuguese columns marching through thick forests, their armor clanking, their guns at the ready. Suddenly, war cries echo from the trees. Queen Nzinga's warriors descend like shadows, arrows, spears, and blades cutting through the invaders. The Portuguese fire their muskets, smoke filling the air, but the enemy they seek has already melted into the jungle. It was a new kind of warfare, guerrilla tactics centuries before the term even existed. Queen Nzinga turned the very land into her ally. Rivers, forests, and mountains became weapons. She made every step dangerous for her enemies. But Queen Nzinga's war was not just fought on the battlefield. It was fought in hearts and minds. She welcomed runaway slaves into her kingdom, granting them freedom and dignity. She gave people a choice: remain in chains under foreign rule, or rise with her in the fight for liberty. Queen Nzinga's reputation spread far beyond the Congo and Ndongo. Across Central Africa, oppressed people whispered her name with reverence. She was not just a queen, she was a symbol, proof that African power and leadership could resist European conquest. For over 30 years, Queen Nzinga battled the Portuguese. Through victories and setbacks, betrayals and shifting alliances, she never surrendered. Even as age caught up with her, even as Portuguese reinforcements poured in, Queen Nzinga remained unyielding. The war for freedom was costly. Countless lives were lost. But Queen Nzinga's defiance ensured that her people's spirit was never broken. And in that defiance, she planted a seed, a belief that Africans could and would resist domination. This was more than survival. This was the preservation of dignity. This was history written not by conquerors, but by the courage of the conquered who refused to bow. Betrayal and the struggle for survival. But as history often reminds us, no empire, no matter how glorious, is safe from betrayal. For Queen Nzinga, the greatest battles of her life were not always fought against foreign invaders, but against the treachery that brewed within her own circle. Betrayal became the bitter reality of her struggle for freedom. When Queen Nzinga returned to her kingdom after the battles against the Portuguese, she found a land exhausted by war, but still standing firm under her command. Her people admired her courage, yet enemies lurked both outside and inside her court. Rival factions within Ndongo and Matamba, jealous nobles, and even former allies began to question her rule. Some whispered that a woman should never have worn the crown. At one point, Queen Nzinga turned to Christianity as a political strategy. She was baptized, even taking the name Ana de Souza after the Portuguese governor's wife. She believed this move might ease tensions and create a bridge for negotiation. But the Portuguese saw her conversion not as a sacred act, but as a tool to exploit. They betrayed her trust, breaking agreements and continuing to seize her people as slaves. Why still? The Portuguese knew that if they could not defeat Nzinga on the battlefield, they could try to break her from within. The Portuguese understood this weakness. They sent spies, spread false rumors, and bought off local rulers with promises of trade, wealth, and power. These betrayals cut deep, not only weakening Queen Nzinga's alliances but also threatening the unity of her people. Even her alliances with neighboring kingdoms were fragile. Some rulers, tempted by European weapons and wealth, sided with the Portuguese. They turned against Queen Nzinga, betraying the very cause of African unity she desperately championed. Each betrayal weakened her, forcing her to retreat, rebuild, and fight again. But perhaps the most painful blow came from within. Some of her own people, weary of endless wars, began to doubt her vision, selling critical information about Queen Nzinga's movements. Plans for ambushes were leaked, fortresses fell unexpectedly, and supply lines were severed. Each betrayal was a dagger in her struggle. They whispered of peace at any cost, even if it meant surrender. To Queen Nzinga, this was unthinkable. She had built her life on resistance, on refusing to bow to foreign domination. To give in now would make every sacrifice meaningless. Still, Queen Nzinga endured, even in exile, even when betrayed by allies and hunted by enemies. She never gave up the fight. She built a new base in Matamba, transforming it into a stronghold of resistance. From there, she waged guerrilla warfare, striking Portuguese forces in surprise attacks, keeping the flame of freedom alive. Her resilience became legendary. To her enemies, she was the stubborn queen who refused to die. To her people, she was the mother who would rather lead them through fire than see them chained. Yet the betrayals left scars. Queen Nzinga knew she could not win every battle. She knew time was against her, but she also knew this truth. Empires may rise and fall, armies may betray, but the spirit of freedom cannot be extinguished. And so, Queen Nzinga pressed on, betrayed, wounded, but unbroken. Because sometimes, survival itself is the most powerful form of resistance. Legacy and the Queen's enduring spirit. Queen Nzinga lived to nearly 80 years old, a rare age for her time. She died in 1663, after more than 4 decades of defiance. The Portuguese wasted no time in trying to reclaim control. With the Queen's commanding presence gone, rivalries resurfaced among her people, and slowly, the Portuguese tightened their grip on the region once more. But they could not erase her. Her people carried her story like fire. Mothers told their children of the queen who sat upon her servant's back rather than kneel. Warriors whispered her name before battle. Centuries later, during Angola's 20th century independence struggle, freedom fighters invoked Queen Nzinga again. Her name became a banner of resistance. Today, statues of Queen Nzinga rise in Luanda. Streets and schools bear her name. She is remembered as warrior, strategist, diplomat, protector, a queen whose complexity made her not just great, but unforgettable. Her life was not perfect. She was ruthless when she had to be. She made compromises, enemies, and sacrifices. But that was her humanity, her strength, and her struggle intertwined. Queen Nzinga's story is Africa's story. Resistance against domination, courage in the face of empire, and the eternal voice of freedom. Her spirit whispers still, never bow, never break, never forget who you are. History is not just names on paper. It is the living memory of those who stood tall when the world tried to make them kneel. Queen Nzinga's story is not only the tale of Angola, it is the story of Africa itself. A reminder that empires are not invincible, and that one woman's courage can echo across centuries. Now, I ask you, what does Queen Nzinga's story teach us about leadership and resistance? Do you believe her strategies still hold lessons for today's Africa? Or has her legacy been overlooked too long? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if this story inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Like this video. Subscribe to Real African History and turn on the bell icon. Because our mission is simple: to make sure Africa's heroes are never forgotten. Because history is not just about what happened. It's about what we choose to remember. And here, on Real African History, we remember Africa's heroes. This is Real African History, where the past speaks to the present.